And thank you so much for choosing Morning Live. Appreciate you staying with us this morning. Now, South Africa could be on the way to hitting a natural resources jackpot now. The Petroleum Agency of South Africa, Pasa, and the Council for Geosciences say that studies have been conducted in the Karoo, and these studies have shown that South Africa has substantial amounts of technically recoverable shale gas resources. The two organizations were briefing the National Assembly's Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy, and the possible extraction of gas from the Karoo could be a game changer insofar as the country's energy crisis is concerned. But does fracking present a potential solution to South Africa's energy crisis is one of the big questions we're grappling with, or are the risks too high? So let's discuss this further, and we're joined on the line or via Zoom by the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Upstream Oil and Gas Regulatory Authority, Petroleum Agency South Africa, Dr. Phindile Masangane. Dr. Phindile, good to see you again. Good to have another conversation with you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Sakina, thank you very much. Good morning to you and your listeners, and thank you very much for giving Pasa an opportunity to talk about shale gas. But Sakina, before we go into that, I'd really like to extend my sincere condolences to you in the media on the passing of Eusebius Makeza. South Africa has indeed lost a brilliant mind. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masangane. You know, that's one of the questions that we are dealing with this morning in terms of people just sending their tributes. So we do appreciate that. And as you say, his family, friends, we receive that on their behalf. So just coming back to our conversation, Dr. Masangane, the energy question in South Africa is, of course, top of mind for obvious reasons. But as the country is eyeing alternative energy sources to ease the worst ever power crisis in the country, let's talk about gas in that mix, because we have had this conversation for quite a while in South Africa. But, you know, on a previous conversation, I said to you, it seems as though we're hearing one side of the narrative. And it's very important that we hear both sides, because what do we have in terms of natural gas resources in South Africa, and how could this potentially impact the power crisis that we have in the country?
Sakina and your listeners, South Africa is well endowed with oil and gas. And as you indicate, we have an opportunity here where we can exploit the gas to ease off this electricity crisis that we face. Even though we're well endowed with gas in South Africa, at the moment, gas actually forms a very, very small part of our energy mix. So we don't use gas as a country. Because we had cheap electricity, we tend to over-rely on electricity. Yet gas actually is more effective, is more efficient, and it's cheaper, for example, for heating spaces, for cooking, and indeed for industrial energy purposes. But as South Africa, we tended to use that all. We used for those applications, we only used electricity. And as a result, now that we've got an electricity supply crisis, we can't even use gas as an alternative. Secondly, Sakina, we've also not exploited our own gas resources as South Africa. The only gas we use in South Africa at the moment is gas that comes from Mozambique, yet we are well endowed with that gas. So I think as a country, we have missed using the resource that we have, which is natural gas, and I think it's time for us to unlock that resource. Sakina, let me also indicate that gas is not just useful as an energy carrier, but it's also used in manufacturing, for example, manufacturing of fertilizer. So in unlocking gas in terms of electricity generation, in terms of other energy applications like heating, like transport, we also then unlock the production of our gas for manufacturing. So in my view, herein lies an opportunity for the country.
So perhaps just to bring a better understanding to lay folk like myself, Dr. Masangane, you talk about gas that we've been using from Mozambique as South Africa. So where and how? If you could just give us examples of where the use of gas has had a major impact on South African industry.
Sakina, currently we import gas from the Pandetemane gas fields, which are in Mozambique. This gas is pumped through an 865-kilometer pipeline. It supplies the major industries in Gauteng, in Mpumalanga, as well as KZN. It also is a major feedstock for the Sasol operation. So you've got Sasol, a big industrial company in our country, significant contribution to our economy, relying on gas that is imported from Mozambique. Importantly, also, you've got huge companies like Consol, the glass companies, relying on this gas from Mozambique. To give you a statistics, those companies combined contribute about 150 billion rands to our GDP. They employ over 46,000 people in those three regions, KZN, Mpumalanga, as well as Gauteng. So that's how much of reliance we have on gas that we import. Imagine if we had our own gas that we can use to support the growth of these industries. And these industrial gas users have indicated that the gas that they have from Mozambique is insufficient. So this shortage of natural gas in this country is a silent cancer to our economy. And Sakina, the day that that gas will become constrained, I think the impact that we are having of electricity supply shortages will look like a joke in South Africa. The economic impact of gas declines from Mozambique is going to be much, much more severe. And yet we've got, and we are well endowed with gas in the Mpumalanga Free State region. So I think it is time for South Africa to unlock this resource and solve the economic crisis that we face.
So when you say, you talk about the silent cancer, that of course is concerning if one were to think about the problems we already have in terms of energy provision in the country. So you also say we do have our own significant potential to develop shale gas exploration in this country. But why is it then, if we are sitting on this natural resource, Dr. Masangane, that we haven't exploited it?
Sakina, it's our own doing. We are the ones that are slowing ourselves down. If you look at our permitting process, we as the regulator have made sure that the investors who are extracting this oil and gas from the host communities, from the areas in which they extract the oil and gas, they should consult effectively and they should consult meaningfully with our people. So I think we've crossed that hurdle. However, if these people are not consulting effectively, I think there are better ways of bringing the matter to resolution rather than to go through protracted legal processes. So at the moment, I think as South Africans, we are quick to run to the courts and we are quick to stall these investments and the unlocking of this resource potential. So our view as the regulator is that we have put stringent measures on how the investors must consult with the local communities. That has been one of the barriers to implementing this project. But as we move forward, what we are also seeing is some people challenging the extraction of this natural gas on the basis that there is a climate change crisis. What we are saying as a regulator is that, yes, there is a climate change crisis, but there is also an economic crisis. Secondly, while there is a climate change crisis, South Africa is moving towards low carbon emission technologies. If you look currently at our build program, there is 5 times more renewables than there is gas to power. So that tells you that this government is rolling out cleaner energy resources, but we cannot stop implementing or bringing to production some of our fossil fuels, particularly gas, because it is a cleaner burning fossil fuel and it is aligned to our decarbonization strategy. So historically, it was about our host communities are not properly consulted. I think that we've resolved that challenge. It's now about the climate change debate. And it looks to me like there are some people who think that the climate change crisis must be our only focus. Yet, if you look at the use of gas, it can resolve both the climate change crisis as well as our economic crisis. So I hope that South Africans will reach a consensus on this matter, that as a country, we can use our gas, and use of gas is still in line with our decarbonization pathway.
And of course, part of that concern, Dr. Masangane, centers around the fact that not only the climate change issue as we broadly think of it, but also the fact that South Africa is a water scarce country. And, you know, there is a concern about not just how we are going to extract this resource, but also the fact that we could tamper with the groundwater surface. And that is a concern for many as well. I'm sure you have looked into that. How do you allay those fears?
Sakina, we definitely have looked at that, and that is relevant in terms of shale gas extraction. For starters, we also have a conventional gas, which of course does not tamper in any way with our water supply. But when it comes to shale gas, there's always the concern that the extraction of shale gas, which uses a technology called hydraulic fracturing, may contaminate groundwater. I can tell you that technologies have moved whereby the technology that is now used is such that when you drill into the shale rock, you make sure that the casing is sealed and there are no leakages. So we have a way of early dictation if there are any leaks from the fluids used in hydraulic fracturing to contaminate our groundwater. So as it is right now, as the Petroleum Agency SA, we've started doing a baseline study. So we are looking at the quality and the quantity of our groundwater in the Karoo, so that when we start a shale gas program, we are able to see if there are any changes, if there is any contamination to our groundwater. So Sakina, I would like to allay the fears of South Africa that we do have technologies in place, one, to dictate early if there is a problem, and we will definitely stop production if they're contaminating our groundwater. But secondly, there are mitigation technologies to make sure that these leaks do not happen in the first place.
So just finally, as we wrap the conversation, Dr. Masangane, of what benefit could, you know, the positive extraction of these natural resources be to South Africa? If you were to sell this to South Africans watching now who've heard many stories, scary stories about fracking and what the potential losses could be to the natural resources around the areas where this could happen. You talk about the Karoo Basin as an example, covering more than half of South Africa's land surface. And this has already started conversations around that. But how do you then convince environmentalists, activists, farmers, and of course just people who are not too sure about what's going on, that this is in South Africa's best interest, that we actually start extracting this natural resource?
Sakina, I think it's very, very important that we have this debate as a country, and we allow the industry to explain the mitigation measures that they have in place. But you asked me about what are the potential benefits that would come from this. As I indicated to you, the only gas that's currently used in South Africa is imported. If you look at, for example, our use of liquid fuels, we also import all the oil, the crude oil from outside, from other countries. So this economy is really, really open to exogenous factors, and therefore we are at risk. We're also open to US dollar, South African rate exchange risks, and importantly, because the gas is imported to our economy, we can't optimally beneficiate it. Imagine if this gas was to be extracted from the Karoo. It is now domestically available. We call it indigenous gas. Now, when you've got your own indigenous gas, one, it protects you from the other commodity prices, because normally it will be priced according to the cost of production in that area. Currently, if you look at the strategies of importing LNG, for example, we will now be susceptible to the cost of LNG of the global price. Yet if you've got your own production of this gas, you are de-linked from those price fluctuations. And as I say, you can then set your own program around whether it's electricity generation, whether it's generation of petrochemicals, whether it's gas for transport use. And I think, Sakina, this is where we do not talk enough about the use of gas for transport. Sakina, here is one statistic that I would like to leave with your listeners. When you use gas for transport, actually you reduce your emissions by more than 40%. So when you have trucks, when you have heavy vehicles using natural gas instead of diesel, you cut your emissions by more than 40%. And believe it or not, it is much cheaper. There is a live example of that in the Free State already, where those companies that are using the gas from our Renergen production, they actually reduce the cost of transportation, and they're also reducing their emissions. That's why we are saying that the use of gas is actually consistent with our decarbonization pathway. So therein lies the benefits, Sakina, not only economic, but also a significant contribution towards carbon emission reduction.
Dr. Masangane, thank you so much for your time. Dr. Phindile Masangane, Chief Executive Officer of the South African Upstream Oil and Gas Regulatory Authority, Petroleum Agency South Africa, Pasa, and talking to us about debates that we ought to have around this matter.